welcome to Perspectives, the third in our series with Singapore Management University, and we're coming to you with a live audience from SMU's School of Law. I'm Sharon Tong. Building a more inclusive society, that's the conversation we're going to have today. And I'd like our audience gathered here and our viewers to consider the following. What does inclusion mean, and how can we give it enough precision to inform public policy? Also, building a more inclusive society requires a conversation about inequality. How prepared are you to narrow that gap? Well, joining me on the panel to explore those questions and more are Belinda Tanoto, member of the Board of Trustees at the Tanoto Foundation, Professor Lily Kong, Provost, and Lee Kong Chian, Chair Professor of Social Sciences at the Singapore Management University, Chia Yong, nominated Member of Parliament in Singapore and President of SPD, an organization that serves persons with disabilities, and Melissa Kwee, CEO of the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre based in Singapore. Thank you for being here and welcome to Perspectives, everyone. Now, we're talking about inclusivity. So what exactly is that? What does it mean to be excluded? And who exactly are the most vulnerable members in society?
Perhaps the best way to talk about this is to begin with an anecdote. I remember when I was in secondary school, I was invited to respond to a questionnaire. And the question that was asked was, do you have friends of other races? And without skipping a beat, my answer was no. But on reflection, it occurred to me that my best friend was actually an Indian girl in school of Sri Lankan descent. And to me, that's what truly being inclusive means, that you are blind to that difference. That there are differences between us, but it doesn't stand in the way. You're not conscious of it. You're not thinking about it and trying to accommodate it because you're just friends. And so to me, inclusiveness is precisely that the person next to you is just a fellow human being. The opposite of inclusiveness is divisiveness, and the worst of that is persecution. And that divisiveness can be based on all kinds of factors, from race to religion to creed to gender to age to ability and so forth. And so an inclusive society, mind you, I think an inclusive society is a utopian one, but an inclusive society is one where we're blind to differences.
So we're not talking about specific groups, isn't it? It's just about everyone.
Yes.
Right? Melissa?
Yeah, no, I would think so. It strikes me that if we reflect, I would say that pretty much all of us have been excluded at some, point in time. You might show up, like I think we said, at a sort of benign that you show up at a restaurant maybe, and they say, sorry, no, you are inappropriately attired, or you might show up a meeting and they might think you're there to make coffee, but actually, that's your board seat, or you might actually be in a situation where you walk into a room and everybody turns the other way. There could be a lot of different ways in which we experience that kind of exclusion, and I would just like to poll even the audience, like how many of us have gone somewhere or done something or been in a situation where we have felt excluded?
So, show of hands.
Yeah, I mean, it's the vast majority of us, and I think we see it from benign neglect to, active discrimination or persecution on the other end.
Well, Yong, now, at 15, you were diagnosed with peroneal muscular atrophy, but I think maybe reading about you, you're possibly one of the lucky ones, because you talked about having grown up in a very inclusive environment. You were in a school which put all your classrooms on the ground level to make sure you have easy access to them. You were surrounded by friends who would help you, from the secondary school friends who would help you up to the second floor whenever you needed to go to the labs, to that law school hunk who would carry you up the stairs at Cambridge NUS, right? So, see, I did my research. But I'm sure it was not all so smooth sailing. So what kind of challenges did you face?
Yeah, well, I think growing up, like you said, I was very blessed, but that didn't mean that, I didn't have difficulties. And I think some of the difficulties could go down to really simple things like not being able to participate in, the sort of activities that your friends participate in, and like, playing the skipping rope and so on and so forth. And just sitting by the side and watching your friends play, sitting by the side and looking after the school bags. Sometimes wanting to do something but knowing you can't do it because you can't walk, you can't participate, you can't take a big role in a play because you can't walk, So I think feelings like that are not very pleasant. But I think, like Melissa was saying, all of us, to different degrees, face exclusion. And I think really it comes down to the mindset of oneself and the people around. One doesn't need to have a disability to be viewed differently. All we need to do is to look not very pretty, or to look different, or to be not very clever in our schoolwork. And then you will feel that sense of not being included. Yeah.
So given that this being excluded is such a, everybody has had that feeling before, why is it then that, for example, let me cite the Lian Foundation survey. It surveyed Singaporeans and they found that 2/3 of Singaporeans actually don't mind sharing public spaces with children with special needs. But when it comes to having their own child, sit next to a child like that, or, having to interact with them, that's where they put the brakes on it. So why then do they still have that mindset despite, everyone, just about everyone, having at some point in their lives felt excluded?
So it's the problem with acceptance, isn't it? Because we all accept that all of us at some point in time will be excluded or have experienced exclusion, but we don't see that as abnormal. And yet when we have a child with a special need or a disability here right in front of us, we look at that as an abnormality. And then we go into that, I don't know how to cope with it. And then that's when we begin to have reservations and fears, and we do not know how to relate. And then we say, what will happen to my child if my child sits next? So I think it comes down to that point of our not being able to see that difference is just another difference that we ought to accept and live and have the person live happily with us, among us.
Belinda, you work with a lot of children in the foundation, in Tanoto Foundation. What kind of experience have you had?
So as part of the work with the foundation, I spent a lot of time with rural communities in Indonesia. And we see that the context of inclusivity may be different from country to country. In Singapore, it may mean something else. But in Indonesia, we have children who don't have access to clean water, children who don't have access to basic health care, to basic quality education. We consistently rank the worst, or one of the worst, in reading, in math and science for international assessments. We need more better teachers. I think sometimes it's not just, the context of inclusivity is so broad. It could be the poor, it could be about women, it could be about the disabled people. And I think it's just like what MP Yong said about how do we change our mindset and our attitude towards those different groups of part of society.
I think everybody starts at a different place. So there might be the parents who, what is the underlying fear, or perhaps misunderstanding that people have? It's the assumption perhaps is that, my child's academic progress will be compromised by having to work with other people who are learning at a different way or at a different, at a different pace. But then reframing the issue to say, well, actually, in life, in fact, maybe your life skills are actually more important, than just a narrow set of academic indicators, especially when you're talking about things like kindergarten, and saying that, in fact, maybe it actually helps you socialize better with even other people. It could be older people. It could be, say maybe your grandmother is in a wheelchair, or, you might be socializing with other people. And this gives you, again, a greater understanding and a greater empathy. I think that's for some people. I think ultimately my hope or my dream is to get to a place where parents see and they want to send their kids to inclusive kindergartens. They want to do that because they say, this is really important, and it's about who we are as a society, and it's about respecting, the different people that come together to make up who we are, as a society. So that's, again, another level or another shift in perspective.
Yeah, may I sort of jump in here, because I thought maybe ideally, we could go even further from what you
let's
said.
do that.
Because Malaysia was talking about, parents who want to send their kids here. I'm thinking about, like what you said, parents who don't even think about it. They just send their kids there because it's so much a part of our community now.
That should be that.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it's about our value system. It's about being able to also climb into other people's shoes. One of my favorite books in literature at school was To Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah. And I remember always Atticus Finch saying, what really matters is your ability to climb into somebody else's shoes and walk around in them. And if you're able to just do that, you will understand what it means to be a person of a different ability, a different class, a different race, a different religion, a different gender. And then it comes naturally after that.
Yeah, I want to hold that thought and take one question before we go quickly to break. We have a question.
Multhuzar here from the ASEAN Studies Center at the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute. Given my affiliation, my question is going to take it to the regional level. Given your very rich and wide and varied experiences, and thank you for all that insightful perspectives you shared, what could the different countries in ASEAN feasibly do at the national level that will help link this notion that ASEAN wants of moving towards a people-oriented, people-centered community in their next phase of integration to meet the regional commitments? Because after all, commitments are made internationally and regionally, but implementation takes place at the national level. So I'd just like to be further inspired by each of your spheres of influence in how what can be feasibly done. Thank you.
I think there are a couple of things that the government can do, like making sure that you have making the right policy choices and making sure that inclusivity is not an afterthought, that you embed it in your policy as you think about providing a robust environment for growth. But I think beyond that, just waiting for the government to do the right thing may not, it's sort of the easy way, right? I think we should really also think about what can the private sector or us as private citizens can do to promote inclusive growth.
All right, Belinda, thank you. We'll pick this up later on, but hold that thought. We're going for a short break. But think about this. Across the ASEAN region, from the urban to the rural, this drive to build an inclusive society. Is there someone still being left out of the conversation? We'll explore that in the next segment of Perspectives. Welcome back to Perspectives. We're discussing the issue of inclusivity. Now, but just how inclusive are we? Let's talk about Singapore, shall we? Singapore has been lauded as a meritocratic society with equal opportunities for all. But is it really such a level playing field, Lily?
I think that a totally inclusive society, as I mentioned earlier, is a utopian one, because everybody as human beings will have some kind of prejudice. It's a question of how we manage that prejudice, how we educate against it. But I think fundamentally every society will have some level of prejudice as such. Singapore, I think, has actually come a long way. If you look at our social harmony in terms of religious, racial issues, for example, that difference, we've been educated about those differences, we've been reminded that we are not to take those differences for granted. Recent effort by the Ministry of Home Affairs has seen the establishment of a new gallery with a new exhibition called Harmony and Diversity, where people are introduced to different religions and what the different tenets are and what the commonalities are as opposed to the differences. So the efforts have come a very long way. But is it utopia here? Have we got it down pat? The answer is no, because individual value systems, individual beliefs, individual prejudices will continue to exist.
Is there, for example, a society somewhere that you think Singapore should try and model itself after? Is there best practice?
Actually, I would say that without sounding self-congratulatory in Singapore, I think Singapore has done very well on many fronts. So I've mentioned the race and religion, but also, just thinking back to when I was in school 30 years ago, the building codes didn't take into consideration the needs of those with physical disabilities. We've come a long way in addressing that. Many other societies, less developed countries, don't have that wherewithal yet to address those sorts of issues, and to that extent, I think we've done well. But still a whole lot more to do, I think, particularly in terms of addressing not the physical infrastructures as much, but the social infrastructures and the personal belief systems.
Let me just take a question first before we move on with this discussion. We've got a second question right here.
My name is Melinda Tan. I'm a master's student from National University of Singapore. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think the question I'm going to ask is relevant to your next discussion. I know that the Prime Minister Lee has mentioned that a fair, inclusive society means that every citizen has the chance to pursue what they want according to their aspirations. But I'm just wanting something more concrete. If we were to achieve a fair and inclusive society, and that is a successful one, how would success look like to you on an individual level, family level, community level, national and even a regional level? Thank you.
So you're saying paint a picture of what a truly inclusive society would look like.
That's right. Thank you.
I think one of the things that I think we would all echo is this idea that we don't see difference. I think that would probably be this ideal in some ways. But that I think in perhaps a practical sense, everybody sees difference. And everybody operates with a variety of different stereotypes and even prejudices. So then the question is, how do we manage those? How do we work with those? How do we be sensitive, actually, to one another's perception of differences? And, I always think that there's a lot that the government can do at the policy level and the sort of national infrastructure level and things like that too. But fundamentally, inclusion or exclusion happens at an interpersonal level too. So a lot of this has to do with the choices that we end up making, about in the spheres that we have influence. So if it's in a family context, where do you send your kids to school? How do you help your children define what success means and the kind of values that you want to have as a family? If you're in a building, if you're in an office sort of like, or a work environment, what kinds of policies do you put in place, as part of your HR? If you're in a leadership capacity, who's on your board? It's wherever you are, right? It's how do you use whatever you have to extend it to invite others into the conversation. And ask yourself who's not there.
Yeah. Can I jump in a little bit and share the business perspective? Oftentimes we see inclusive growth as a constraint, as a limitation or expectations from society. But how do we turn, from the business perspective, how do we turn inclusive growth to become a business opportunity, to become an opportunity? How do we incorporate the poor or the marginalized, the vulnerable into our value chain, whether as customers or as suppliers? In developing countries, the poor make up a large portion of the customer base. So I think it's important to think about it also in a broader sense, like how do we turn it into an opportunity instead of a limitation on the business?
Do you have an example?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did in the business, we tried to invest in the local communities around our businesses. We rolled out this small medium enterprise vocational training program. So we provide the communities with vocational training to become mechanics, to become heavy machinery operators, and then we also give them financing so that they can lift themselves and their families out of poverty while having that multiplier effect. And that's a win for the business because we now have a pool of very reliable suppliers and contractors around our business that's within 100 kilometers of our business.
Okay. Can I take the next question, please? Someone at the back.
My name is Mila Davenport, and I'm here in the capacity of an interested community member. Actually, Belinda, you just touched briefly on the topic that I wanted to ask about, which is why should business care, and what can we do if we're part of the business community? What can we do to help other businesses care if the opportunity is not already right in front of them? Thank you.
I think what Lily mentioned about, we've come a long way as a society, but we still have a long way to go. Even in our business, it's a very male-dominated industry, but we make specific decisions, deliberate decisions within our business model to invest in the local communities, as well as to think about how do we incorporate women in the labor force. And one of the examples I always talk about is, her name is Lita. I met her last year when I visited the factory, and she never graduated from high school, but we give her training, and now she's one of our forklift drivers at the factory site. And I think it's important. There are many more Litas out there in our business, and I think it's important as a business leader to really think about how can I turn this into an opportunity, but also making deliberate choices that promote inclusive growth.
Melissa, you head the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center. So how do you then reach out to these businesses?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of an issue around a spectrum. I mean, I think on one hand, you can think of businesses who are trying to do this as part of risk management. They say, we need to do this because actually it's a compliance issue, or we need to do this because our customers are actually telling us that they actually, are going to start not buying our products or not participating, with us if we don't change these things. So sometimes there's a risk element that they kind of respond to. I think we have to acknowledge that that's part of the levers, if you will. But then again, there's also the opportunity. I think that Belinda talks about. So I think for businesses, a lot of times, people want to work for businesses that also do the right thing. So from an employee engagement, from a talent recruitment, standpoint, there's also that dimension of it as well too. So that's the plus for businesses. And Belinda already talked about the other area, which is actually looking at actually creating growth from inclusive supply chains and things like that too. So that could be innovating new products, bottom of the pyramid products and things like that. So this is how we're going to do things, creating breakthrough cost models. These are all kinds of different ways in which you can actually promote inclusive growth as a business. And it's just telling these stories, showing the examples, and telling other people that this is not crazy. This is pretty normal, actually. And here's a whole bunch of examples.
Okay, this gentleman.
Hi, my name is Salhin. I'm a student in SMU. So my question is with regards to a source of exclusion, if you will. So nationality is exclusive. Citizens have citizenship rights which non-Singaporeans don't enjoy. And this, I feel it might be a source of exclusion in the Singaporean community because, for example, with regards to foreign workers in Singapore, construction workers, domestic helpers, or even foreign talent, as it were. So how do we counter this source of negative perception towards this group of people? Do you think they should be part of this inclusive process that we were all talking about just now? And if so, how? Yeah.
I think it's also got to do with your question also about PM wanting to build a fair and equitable society, and I think ultimately and what Lily talked about, the equal leveling the playing field. These are all very nice sounding concepts, but I think ultimately how we're going to work them out is very different. When you talked about citizenship rights and so on and so forth, I think what we need to understand is that being inclusive does not mean that we do not differentiate between different sets of obligations and rights and statuses. And I think that is important because within any society, we all have different roles to play. So, citizenship comes with citizenship rights, PR, residence comes with PR rights, an employee comes with employee rights, employers come with employer rights. So I think very, very fundamentally, therefore, what we need to do is not to go in with this idea that everybody is the same and everybody is equal, because that's not true and that can never happen, but rather that we learn to respect each other for what we are and what we are not.
I just want to take a quick question, but we'll get to the answer of that question after the break. So next question.
Hi, my name is Jake. I'm from the Tanoto Foundation Connects. So my question is with regard to policy, especially policy aimed at tackling inequality, which has contributed to anti-globalization sentiments around the world. So a number of developed countries such as Finland and the Netherlands have considered policies such as universal basic income and cooperatives. So how viable do you think these concepts are for Asia, especially developing Asia?
Okay, thank you. And we'll address that after the break. So we're going to take a quick break. Please stay tuned to Perspectives. Welcome back to Perspectives, where we're talking about building an inclusive society. And before the break, we got a question from the floor asking about universal basic income and whether or not something like this is viable for Asia. Melissa, would you like to kick that off?
I mean, where does the question come from? Universal basic income comes from a desire to ensure that everybody has access, everybody has some kind of equal opportunity in some ways to participate in the benefits of the system, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether that's employment opportunities and things like that. But I think when it comes to the question of, I mean, I'm not a fan of big government personally, so I don't think that, the solution necessarily is government has to sort out the issue for us, so we all just pay more taxes and they sort it out, and hopefully everything gets done. But rather, I mean, why do we do those kinds of things? Why do we participate in that kind of redistribution? We participate maybe because we don't see what the needs are ourselves. That what if we had the opportunity to have voluntary redistribution? And to me, donations and support for the community is voluntary redistribution. Philanthropy, as opposed to taxation, which then tends to fund bigger kind of like government types of programs. So I would be actually more in favor of actually making more needs visible and empowering the community to help one another as part of meeting those various needs. That's my particular view.
Besides just talking about redistribution of income, we talk about education, and education is a key tool to breaking people out of the poverty cycle, so that children who are born into poor families, they don't necessarily grow up as poor adults. How does that work?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, education is key to breaking the poverty cycle. But I think there's a broader role of education. It's not just about giving people the knowledge and skills for employable work, but also developing empathy, developing the right mindset and attitude for life. And this is something that we can mirror also at home, and not just in schools, but also at home in terms of role modeling for our children. What are the attitudes, or how do we want them to deal with the differences or to accept the differences?
Okay, let's take a question. Oh, there first? Okay.
Hi, I'm Christina Stanley from Ogilvy Public Relations. The future of a truly caring and inclusive society is in the hands of our next generation. So how do we inculcate that culture of inclusiveness among our young, where, as Lily has mentioned, being blind to differences, particularly among those who are physically and intellectually disabled? Yet, our education system in Singapore places great emphasis on academic excellence. So how is this compatible with inculcating that inclusivity and acceptance of those who are less able?
Thank you.
May I? Yes, I agree with you that the future lies in our children, but I also back to take this to the present and say that it starts now. So it doesn't start with our children, but it starts with each of us. It's a question of whether we're willing to embrace and willing to take that step forward. Are we also then willing to say, instead of, are we willing to then say, for my child, academic grades are not going to be number one, but values? If I think a lot of our parents are despite all the challenges that they face, are willing to start considering that, then maybe we could come quite a way to start with our own kids now. And of course the schools, right? The schools where it starts.
I completely agree with that. I mean, it's really about what you said, Yong, and what you said, Belinda. We are modeling the way for the young. So, well, the future, you're right, is in the hands of the young. They are looking at us and looking to us. And if we're behaving in ways that demonstrate that it's okay to ostracize, it's okay to have these prejudices, they will learn that it's okay to have these ostracization and these prejudices. My favorite question to myself very often is, when kids are in school, is the teacher saying, well, there is this civics lesson, but let's just take that time to do makeup for science or math or something. And our parents saying to the teachers, please, my child needs that extra lesson to catch up with math. Can you just forget about that time when you're talking about what? Values? Forget it, just get them up to speed with math, which is what is going to get them their PSLE grades or whatever. So it's us.
I think we also just have to accept too that we're really starting to see kind of the dark side of everybody chasing a very narrow definition of success, and whether that's really looking at youth suicides or other things which are a result in a sense of people not measuring up to what is the so-called expected standard and things like that. I think we just have to fundamentally ask ourselves when it comes to our values. It's not abstract. It's very personal. And are we going to make those choices, I think, ourselves?
Right. Question time. Yes, please.
Great. Hi. My name is JJ Lee, and I'm from Kwee Communications. And my background is in health policy. And so many times in Washington, disparities or health disparities or inclusivity is such a huge part of the conversation when we're talking about health access and patient advocacy issues. In this region, where do you think we have some room for more discussion when it comes to health disparities?
I think there are a couple of things that in addition to the right government policies, we have to form partnerships across the different sectors, whether it's the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and there needs to be better collaboration and coordination across the multiple sectors to achieve that common purpose, that common goal of inclusive growth. And in addition to that, I think it's important to define inclusive growth in a more granular manner. So when you say good health outcomes, what does that really mean for the country? And it will be different from country to country. I think that's important for us to think about what is that common purpose, common goal that we're trying to do, and then mobilize all the different sectors and all the different stakeholders that are involved.
Right? Yeah. I guess it depends on what you mean also by the health disparity and what the basic standards of medical care would be. And then again, who comes in to ensure that basic standard of care? Is it, again, what Melissa says, big government does everything, or is this a collaboration between the different sectors and providers? And then again, the individual, the patient's own responsibility for the patient's health as well. So I think it's totally a community, one people approach, I think.
Yeah. Right, thank you. Question? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Melinda. I'm with the Head Foundation. I completely agree with the panelists that I think a lot of it has to be ground up and as a community approach. But I also think that a lot of that is also due to creating a culture where we celebrate and broaden definitions of success. How well have we done on that front? How much can we do, for instance, to celebrate achievements, not just in traditional fields of profession, but also in volunteer work or in community service or public service? Are we doing enough on that front?
We try. Can we do more? Of course we can do more. I think for us too, we see ourselves as being a catalyst. Ultimately when we, we run the President's Volunteer and Philanthropy Award. So, the highest, figure in the country gives the award actually to leading nonprofit business, individuals who give of themselves, who demonstrate the spirit. And SPD actually, won that award for the nonprofit category last year. So there is sort of national level recognition and award. I actually think that to your point around ground up, actually what we need to do is celebrate more of the everyday heroes. The idea that I actually really like is something that they do, in the U.S., where they actually have a person every single day, that is called the Daily Point of Light. It's by the Points of Light Foundation, and they identify an individual who's making that sort of difference in their community, and the president writes to them, and thanks them and acknowledges them for their contribution. And I think, to me, if we could really start seeing that and have who tells us? Well, the community has to tell us, right? It's like, oh, that's my neighbor. Oh, no, that's my auntie at the school, or that's somebody who's in my community. If we could all be just looking out and catching people doing things right, rather than catching people doing things wrong, I think that would also shift part of our culture.
So you just increase Prime Minister's workload, having to write letters.
Well, there are people that can help him, out to do that.
Okay, before we go to the break, we'll take one more question before we go to break. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Nazat Fahima. I come from Muslim Youth Ambassadors of Peace, and trying to promote inclusive society is one of our missions. I noticed that every time we talk about inclusive society, it's always at a macro level, but what's required to actually build inclusive society is actually at the micro level. And in that, I noticed Prof said that it's about blinding the difference. But don't you think it's the appreciation for the diversity that actually fills the gap as opposed to being blind to the differences? So what do you think?
Yes. Okay. So I don't disagree with that. I think that it's, again, unrealistic to say we're blind to differences, right? Sometimes that happens, and that's when we celebrate that. But very often we're not blind to differences. We see the differences, and how then do we accept the differences and embrace those differences? And I agree with you completely that it is at the micro level. It is a bit of trench warfare. It's person by person, value system by value system for each individual. And for that, I'm very happy to say that, some of the things we do at the Singapore Management University try to address just that. And not just at SMU, but in many organizations. Let me just cite a couple of examples. Many organizations, including SMU, has had this activity called Dining in the Dark. Okay. And many of you will probably be familiar with it, where you blindfold people who are well-sighted, okay, and you try and have them dine in the dark. And just speaking to my colleagues and students who sat through that and say, gosh, we didn't realize how difficult it is to eat when you can't see.
Okay. Thank you. We can finish this after at the next segment, but we have to take a quick break. Please stay with us. You're watching Perspectives, and we left the last segment talking about how to build an inclusive climate. And Lily, you were in the midst of talking to us.
So I was in the middle of an example about, sort of dining in the dark experience, but there are many other experiences that warm my heart as an educator, because I watch the young people going through some of what we do and learning through it. Just as another example, we recently had a theatre class, right? And the students were rehearsing for a performance that's coming up, and for those of you who are interested, you can go watch it. It's called Charged. And it was really about racism. And one of the things that we do with the students is not just to help them perform on stage, but to reflect on the play, to reflect on their own experiences, to tease out what their value systems are, what their own hidden prejudices are, what hidden agendas that they themselves may not be so conscious of when they deal with people of different races, for example. And that exercise, I think, needs to be done individual by individual, student by student, class by class. And if we're able to do that, invest in programs, invest in leaders, invest in champions among students who believe in helping peers, in talking through these with peers, I think we will achieve a whole lot more in this lifetime than the macro policies. The macro policies are important to have, but at the end of the day, it's the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think a lot of it too is actually, I think it's a great question, and I think, you know, a lot of times we say, oh, we need to promote acceptance and understanding, things like that. Actually, we need to know how to live with difference too. You know, we need to sort of learn skills of conflict management and learn how to agree to disagree, because, you know, without being disagreeable, right? You know, I think that's the other challenge as well too, because you may not come to a point of reconciliation where you have a fundamental, you know, acceptance of one another's views. But so be it, you know. But how do we do that in a way that still maintains, you know, good relations, essentially, you know, and that we can all still function in society. So I think these are the kinds of difficult. If we can learn to have difficult conversations, if we can learn to sort of manage conflict and still respect each other at the end of the day, I think that I think is what we should be aiming towards.
Okay. Question from the back. Yes, please.
Hi, thanks very much for taking this question. I'd like to direct this to perhaps Prof. Kong and NMP Chia, because you talked about SAVH and dining in the dark, and my company in the past, we had one of this exercise, and other than the fact that it gave us a longer lunch break, it really helped us to understand and walk around in their shoes. But I think there's a report today that said that the deaf community is also facing its challenges. I think the report stated that the survey of 77 companies, mostly SMEs, found that 1 in 2 did not want to hire deaf people, which to me is strange, because like you can just use Word document to communicate with one another. So what do you think is the role that should be played by the private sector, NMP Chia as well, from your own personal experience? I mean, your secondary school was very kind and accommodating in helping you to fit in, but I understand when you went to JC, and at one of Singapore's top JCs, no less, you decided to drop out after a while. Do you think perhaps there's a systemic problem in place, because we have SEP schools, and by definition, when you have SEP schools, you have to exclude certain communities of people.
Okay.
So do we have, and we, like the SMU student mentioned just now, we have foreign workers in our midst. What then is the optimal level of inclusiveness? Who gets to decide who is included, and should the majority always be right?
Okay, let's Yong, why don't you address that? That's a very long question, yeah.
I think, let me address the employment issue. I think it's actually exciting. We are in exciting times, economic restructuring, unfortunately, a high level of unemployment. But exciting times because these are times when people are beginning to rethink about how to run their businesses and how to restructure their own business models. And that requires a very fundamental mindset change. To know that instead of saying, oh, you know, I can't get employees, I can't get this and I can't get that. But look at what we have. And we have people within the community of different abilities and different disabilities who are able to be trained to work and who are willing to work. And this could be your captive pool, captive in a good sense, of employees. So I think I would encourage SMEs to look at this not as a CSR, but rather as a win-win. This is a good commercial decision. It's commercial sense to employ people with disabilities. And I think, you know, on the other points about the differentiation in different schools, perhaps I should leave it to the educator.
Sorry, before we do that, can I just ask a question that, from a different point of view? Yeah. You're talking about mindset change, but is there also a mindset change needed for the people in that situation?
Yes, I think so. Thanks for prompting me, because I've also always believed that people like us who have different disabilities, I think we need to also recognize what we can do and what we cannot do, and what we can push ourselves to do. I think we need to step out of our comfort zone and step out of our sensitivities. Sometimes, you know, people will say, hey, okay, I'll see you later, I'll run along, and then we get insulted. What do you mean run along? I can't run, I can't even walk. No. I don't think we should be like that. So we must learn to reach out as well, so that people can accept us just as we wish to accept each other.
Okay, Prof,
Yes, very happy for that question. Thank you. I do think that institutions have a very significant role to play, but beyond institutions, of course, governments have a role to play, and then moving the other way, families have a role to play, and businesses have a role to play, and individuals have a role to play. I don't think there is a single silver bullet in all of this. Everybody's got to play their part as such. So to the extent that we have a 1 hour sort of lunch break where you learn how difficult it is to eat in the dark, that's not going to change anything except for perhaps pulling at the heartstrings for a little while. But those efforts at education need to be sustained. They need to be sustained over time through different platforms, through different occurrences, through different examples, through different case studies, and hopefully through all of that, the value system embeds. And then an SME might get involved, not because it's legislated and because they have to do it, but because it's just the right thing to do.
Right. Well, I want to wrap this discussion just asking my panelists very briefly to tell me what you hope to see, short and long term, what you hope to see happen in order for us to go ahead and build this inclusive society. Melissa, can I start with you?
I actually wanted to pick up on the point that you made, and actually I believe fundamentally that the only way that we're going to change things is by building relationships with people who are different, and truly, if we love people, not just know people or observe people, or but if we get to know people, if we understand that we have the same hopes, fears, dreams, challenges, and we can love them, then we will make space, because I think you asked the question, who is it that sets the rules? Well, I mean, in life, it's the winners who set the rules. It's the people who have power who set the rules. So each one of us has power in a different sphere. When we talked about exclusions, there are some. We've all been excluded in some way, shape, or form. Some of them are very small. Oh, you didn't wear proper shoes, so you can't go to the restaurant. But some of them are very deep, and some of them are multiple and layered. So for those of us whose exclusions are very thin and selective, and actually it doesn't hinder us, we have to focus on creating that space.
So I'd like to hear from the rest, but just keep your comments really short.
Right.
Yes,
okay, I think it starts with each one of us. I think each of us would like to probably examine ourselves and see how we can rework our own values and not expect another person to do it.
Right.
And I agree with that entirely. I'd just like to add that inclusion takes a village. It takes everybody to chip in for it to really be achievable.
Okay, Belinda.
Can I share a short story?
Short one, yes.
Okay, so I want to share a story from my childhood. When I was younger, every birthday, my parents would take me to the orphanage to share our toys and books. And the younger version of me was very upset, and I said, why does everybody get to have a fun birthday party while I get to share my toys and books at an orphanage? But the current version of me really appreciates it now. The more you have, the more you need to share. And I think that's what all of us here have been talking about, is that each of us here has a unique gift. How do we use that gift to help all of those around us?
Nice thoughts to end the program with. That's all the time we have for this episode. Please join me in thanking our panel for their enlightening responses. Belinda Tanoto, Professor Lily Kong, Chia Yong, and Melissa Kwee. And thanks to all of you in the audience for your participation as well. We trust our discussion has given you some insights on inclusivity. Do let us know what you think of our program. You can leave your comments on our website, and you can tweet us as well at CNA Perspectives. I'm Sharon Tong. Thanks for being with us on Perspectives.